Today we'll be diving into my full 100-mile review of the Saucony Endorphin Speed, and I'll be telling you why I think it might be the best value for money shoe you can currently get. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got another shoe review for you all. This is a follow-up video from my initial impressions review of this shoe, the Saucony Endorphin Speed. I gave it a really good initial review. I've run it now just over 100 miles in a range of different runs, whether that be some shorter runs, some long runs, some tempo runs, and some race pace intervals. Everything to put the shoe fully through its paces. So this is going to be a really thorough review. If you enjoy running shoe reviews or anything running or triathlon related, then please consider subscribing to the channel for more content just like this video. Let's jump straight into the review and talk about the upper of this shoe. In the age of Vaporfly, Vapor Weave, all of these different really thin materials that we're seeing from companies such as Nike, the upper on this shoe, the Saucony, is definitely a more traditional one. We've got a significant heel counter, it looks traditional, it feels traditional, and that's a really good thing, because in my mind, why fix what isn't broken? A lot of people have problems with lockdown and with comfort and familiarity in lots of these new fast-paced shoes, but you're not going to have that at all with this shoe. This is definitely a more technical version of some of the more classic shoe uppers. However, I think it's only been an improvement. We've still got some really thin mesh pieces in the toe box and on other parts of the shoe to allow for breathability and to make this shoe really lightweight. But it's not at the cost of lockdown or comfort, which are two things I think a lot of runners value really highly. And also, this material, the mesh material, doesn't hold a lot of water, which is really good for people like me living in the UK where it's constantly raining. We don't want our shoe to be clogged full of water. It's just not fun. It feels heavy, it feels gross. But with this shoe, it seems to wick away a decent amount of that water in this nice thin mesh material. Another thing that it's kept from more classically designed uppers is this really nice, strong heel counter. It's nice and sturdy, and we've got some cushioning around the ankle and at the back, which enables an amazing lockdown in this shoe. In my whole 100 miles, even going up to some 5K race pace efforts, I haven't felt any wobbles with this shoe. It just seems to be glued to my foot for every single stride. That plus the really excellent lacing system with some extra eyelets at the top for a runner's knot, which I personally haven't found necessary in this shoe, but I know some people like to do in all of their shoes. The lacing system, being able to loop the tongue in, with the tongue still being attached to the rest of the material, but not a single piece of material like we see in the Flyknits. It creates this really snug feel while still being roomy and breathable without any of the concerns that I've had when reviewing something like the Tempo Next Percent or the Infinity Run from Nike. I've also found that this upper has been really good for longer runs. It's able to grow slightly and shrink slightly with your feet as they start to accumulate and lose water throughout a long run. So I haven't had any problems with the shoe becoming too tight or uncomfortable through longer runs, and I think it'd be really appropriate for a longer race if that's something you were choosing to do. I haven't noticed any significant changes in the upper outside of it getting kind of dirty, because that's how we live in the UK. I haven't noticed any wears, any tears, no bits starting to bulge due to wear. It feels almost exactly like when I put it on the first time, if not maybe slightly molded to my foot, although I wouldn't say that's a bad thing at all. For me, I have to give this upper a 3 out of 3. I don't have a bad word to say about it. The material is great, the lacing system is great, the heel count is great, the feel is great of it. You know, it's just brilliant. I couldn't complain about this. Yes, I sometimes get slightly cold toes, but it's not nearly as bad as some of the other lightweight racing type materials. Overall, 3 out of 3. Basically my perfect and dream upper. Time for the midsole now. And this might be my favourite part of the whole shoe, which is surprising considering I just gave the upper a 3 out of 3. This shoe uses Saucony's Pebax based foam, which is in the pro version of this shoe as well. I have to say I really like this foam. It has the right amount of cushioning for me while also being responsive. It's not too squidgy so you feel like you're going everywhere, but it's not too hard where it's going to really start to plague your ankle and knees as you start to put down a lot of force on the higher ones. It seems to be the perfect balance, and I feel like, although I don't know exactly how much energy return I'm getting, obviously, I feel like I'm being pushed forward by the foam as well as the nylon plate. The foam is brilliant and it's also incredibly lightweight, and there's not a massive amount of it, which definitely helps to keep the shoe down. And without a massive amount, I've still found that it has the correct amount of cushioning for something like a half marathon, maybe even up to a full marathon, although I haven't done that yet in this shoe. Wedged in between those two parts of Pebax based foam is that nylon plate, which really is the cherry on top of this shoe. Yes, it's not as tough and as hard as some of the carbon plates that we've seen from the likes of Nike or the likes of Hoka, but it feels amazing, and I think it might actually be better that it's not super hard, because this is a shoe that you can definitely use day to day, and you don't want that really hard plate on everything, especially if you're going to be using this shoe for some long runs. But it's still hard enough to use, I think, for some of those race pace efforts or even a race, which is incredible for a shoe of this value. I do think that this midsole is appropriate for both training and racing, having tested it in long runs, in some easy runs, in some tempo workouts, and to get a recent 10k PB. It feels brilliant at all ranges, and I just haven't noticed anything bad about it. The foam hasn't changed at all from what I can notice over the first 100 miles. Maybe it's slightly more cushioned and slightly more molded to my feet, but I wouldn't say any of those are bad things, and the same goes for the nylon plate in the midsole. The nylon plate might have lost a slight bit of its rigidity. However, I wouldn't say that's a bad thing for a shoe that I'm going to be running in really regular, at least a couple of times a week. And it isn't getting worse. It seemed to have just got to a point where it's slightly less rigid than initially, and it's staying at that level. So I don't have worries about it totally losing any of that spring that it gives you. Overall, I'm going to give it a 2.8 out of 3, and I'm docking that 0.3 simply because I really would have liked that nylon plate to maintain the same stiffness as when I got it out of the box, because that was my ideal stiffness, I think, for an insole plate that isn't a carbon racing plate. So the fact that it's got slightly less stiff is a small problem for me. However, that's far from me writing off the shoe. I still think that it's excellent. I'd still be happy to race in this shoe when races come back. And finally, to the outsole, and as with the rest of this review, I really don't have anything bad to say. In my initial review, I was slightly worried that the shoe might be slightly light on grip, especially in the forefoot area. But I can say, having run in this in the vast majority and outside, I haven't noticed that at all. I've run in the rain and in the snow on one occasion on one of my long runs, and it performed admirably in both situations. I didn't experience any traction problems like I would have expected from something that can be really comfortable in race-paced efforts. I think this triangular design does a really good job of moving water away from underneath your foot, so that by the time the foot is in full contact with the ground, you are not necessarily still on top of that puddle. You're back in contact with the tarmac, so you are ready really to pull back and to push yourself forward. And that's something I really appreciate with how much rain we're currently experiencing. And, you know, with the rest of this shoe, there's no change. After the first 100 miles, it looks like I got it out of the box yesterday and I've done one run outside. Barring a little bit of dirt and discoloration, nothing else wrong with the outsole of this shoe. I was worried about some of the exposed foam in the midsole and the backsole of this shoe, but I can say I haven't noticed a single problem. It is slightly discoloured, although I would expect that for the type of running that I've been doing, going through puddles and some standing mud on the roads from the tractors around here. but I wouldn't complain about any of those things because I haven't noticed it starting to wear or rubbing at all. It still looks great and it hasn't impacted the feel of the foam in that portion at all. Again, I'm going to give it a 2.8 out of 3, just docking 0.2 because maybe it could have a little bit more grip on the bottom, so it could be used on grass and on damp grass. And I just say that because lots of people might be considering using this for some local races or even some bigger races, and especially local races can often start on grass. I know my local 5k park run starts on grass and then moves over to tarmac, so maybe that little bit of extra grip early Saturday morning, you know, you want that little bit of grip for that park run, but generally I wouldn't worry. You know, I do the vast majority of my running on tarmac and some slightly slippery surfaces or in snow recently apparently, and I have absolutely no complaints with the outsole of this shoe. Finally, on to value, and I have to say this is probably the best value shoe on the market right now. I can't think of another shoe that you can do long runs, easy runs, tempo runs, intervals, and I'd be happy to race in it. This is such an incredible shoe, and I bought it for £150 here in the UK. I have to say, no complaints, value, 3 out of 3. Go out and buy this shoe. Or maybe you want to wait for the second version. As I talked about in my previous video, which I'll link up in the corner, there is going to be a second version rumoured to come out this year in 2021. However, man, if this shoe goes on sale while the second version comes out, pick up the first version, because if it drops to close to £100, this is an incredibly good shoe at £150. If it drops, go and pick it up. I'm even considering buying a second pair depending on the prices and how much they change for the second version. 3 out of 3, no complaints. This is the best value shoe. I'm definitely going to be keeping this one in my rotation, and you know, it's going to stay with me for a long time, if not a second version. That gives us an overall score of 11.6 out of 12. This is my highest scoring shoe so far. Highly recommend it. Go and pick yourself up one. You definitely won't regret it. Use it for any type of runs and it will be a staple, a workhorse in your running shoe rotation. You can even drop down to 2 shoes from 3 because you're not having to worry about a long run shoe and a tempo run shoe. Chuck this in, it does so many things, I can't recommend it enough. And that's it for this video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing to the channel as it really helps out. And on screen now you'll see a link to all of my other running shoe videos. Click on those, enjoy them, compare this one to those, and I'll speak to you all next time.